Good morning. It's now 36 minutes past 10 this Sunday morning. You're joining me, Adam Boulton, here on Times Radio. And at this time every Sunday, we like to ask a big political question. And as the party conference recedes in the driving mirror, all focus is now on the upcoming budget on November the 26th. But it looks to be a pretty tough job facing the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves. There is a so-called black hole of perhaps £30 billion or more, for which you'll either need to find tax rises or spending cuts. The cost of government borrowing is eye-wateringly high. The national debt is going up, and productivity and growth are sluggish. So is this country going bust? Let's speak to the founder of Phones for You, John Caudwell, and to Gerard Lyons, who's the chief economist at Nat Wealth. Welcome to you both.
Good morning.
Good morning, Adam. Good morning, John.
John Caudwell, you know, as an industrialist, as an investor in this economy, what's your assessment? Are we really heading for another bust, another big economic shock?
Well, I think Britain's been in a state of decline now for probably 20 years, and it may be longer than that, but we've been in this state of decline because of politicians doing all the wrong things, looking at buying votes rather than actually investing in the future of Britain. And of course, we've had the headwinds that we know about. We had the financial crash in 2008, we had COVID, we've got the Russian-Ukraine conflict there, Gaza. So there's a lot of headwinds that you can point to that have held the economy back. But nonetheless, they're just excuses rather than actual mitigations, because if you do all the right things, regardless of those difficulties, you get the right result. And unfortunately, we've not done that. We've not invested in Britain in the right way to create high-paid jobs, high-technology businesses, and then with investment.
And Gerard Lyons, I mean, what is your diagnosis of the state of the economy? You know, is everything flashing red on the dashboard?
Yeah, most things are flashing red. We need to break the cycle. We're in a low growth environment that's leading to higher debt. And unfortunately, it's now leading to the wrong policy decisions. Structurally, the UK is a low growth, low productivity, low wage economy. And in recent years, we've become a high public spending, high taxation, high debt economy. So that's not very good indeed. Now, if you're looking for crumbs of comfort, we're not the only ones in this difficult situation. Unfortunately, Western Europe is the low growth region of the global economy. So we need to actually start comparing ourselves with the high growth economies, including America, and including particularly the Indo-Pacific. Now, the positive is that we know the problems and therefore we know what needs to be done. The unfortunate thing is partly politics and partly the difficult current situation makes it unlikely we will pull those necessary policy levers anytime soon.
And as John Caudwell, what do you think needs to be done? Your focus is very much on investment in infrastructure, but of course the question is where the money would come for that.
Well, that's the beauty of my proposal, really, that there is very little cost, if any, whatsoever, because it's all about providing a concierge service to inward investing companies who would create higher paid jobs in high technology spaces, so that we really are at the forefront of technology, and especially on the environment, which is going to be a more and more demanding scenario going forward. Now, the way you do that in the concierge service is to find out what companies who might want to invest in Britain would need us to do to encourage them to come. And of course, one of those levers would be corporation tax, potentially. And that costs the government nothing in the short term, because to promise reduced corporation tax for a period of 10 to 20 years is not a short-term cost. There is a long-term potential implication in that, but then that comes as a result of a growing economy. And these companies that come to the UK that enjoy a differential corporation tax, or of course it would include current businesses that are in the UK that fit the criteria that's necessary, which is high wages, high job creation, high technology. And you hold them to account for that. So they don't just get a reduced corporation tax or any other benefits as a result of saying they're going to do these things. They have to actually do them.
Immediately, though, Gerard Lyons, rather than cutting taxes, doesn't the government face the prospect of having to put them up, to cover the black hole.
Well, that's right. I produced a recent report for the Centre for Policy Studies called Breaking the Cycle, which outlined the three key things I think we need to do to turn the economy around. Supply side measures, such as John's touched on, sensible monetary policy to keep inflation under check. And third is fiscal credibility, which comes directly back to your question. Part of the problem in the UK is the fiscal rules and our back to front approach to fiscal policy. Now, unfortunately, you can't change this from a position of weakness. So we are where we are. Now, we go into this budget with at least a fiscal gap of 30 billion. If the Chancellor wants to create more headroom, then that fiscal gap will be higher. Now, the markets, as well as business, need to be kept on side. Markets are looking for that fiscal gap to be closed and for more headrooms. They're looking for not just 30 billion, but closer to 50 billion of tax changes. Ideally, what we should do is cut public spending and cut public spending in the areas that do not damage the economy. But that, as we saw in the summer, is not politically credible. Therefore, we come down to the tax changes or borrowing. Borrowing, it's difficult to borrow even more. We're already selling about £310 billion of gilts this fiscal year, and we're paying a high price for that. So it comes down to the tax. That's a political decision. Now, very briefly, it's a choice between a piecemeal approach, which seems to be the likely approach the Chancellor is taking, which leaves the economy looking vulnerable and the markets fearing we will be in a repeat situation next year, or the alternative, which is to break some of those manifesto commitments, because it's only by changing those major taxes, such as VAT or income tax, that you can make headroom. One point not always understood, but was announced by the OBR after the budget last year, is that the average taxpayer in the UK is paying the lowest share of income tax any time since 1975. I'm not saying income tax should go up, but what I'm saying is that the Chancellor has a choice. She's going down that tax route, is either going to be a piecemeal approach, which doesn't solve the problem, or she needs to, unfortunately, from her perspective, break some of those manifesto commitments, either on VAT or income tax.
I mean, John Caudwell, you were saying you'd like to possibly see some cuts in taxes as an inducement, but short term, that's not going to happen.
Let me be clear on that, Adam. This was a reduction in taxes for new businesses coming to the UK that we're not paying any tax anyway, so there's zero cost to that. But I agree with Gerard completely. We have to, the Labour Party have to say, because of all these factors, we got it wrong, and the pledges we made, we cannot keep. And they'd need to put VAT up. I gave them a budget some time ago, which put VAT up by 1% to 21%, raising 9 billion. Basic rate of tax up by 1p, which raises 6.5, 7 billion. An online gambling tax, which raised 5 billion, a cut in public spending by only 1%, which raises 12 billion. Now, 1% cut in public sector spending is really quite easy. Some areas would be very tough to do that in, like the NHS and defence, which has got to go up, of course, but other areas, it's relatively easy to make things much more slick, much more efficient, and to save over 1%.
Well, you say that, but isn't it really welfare, the welfare budget that would have to go?
No, I don't think it is. No, you just make everything way more effective and efficient, like I had to do in my business all the time. Everything in life gets bloated and complacent if you don't hold it to account. People get complacent, businesses get complacent, and you have to shake them up every now and again to get effectiveness and to get efficiency and to drive productivity. And we need a big productivity drive, not just in government, of course, but I'm talking about government now and cutting spending. We need a big productivity drive there, but we also need to increase the productivity of British businesses, and that requires a whole study on how do we do that? How do we drive greater efficiency using AI, using capital allowances to invest in automation, to find ways of getting way bigger GDP per capita than we've got at the moment. But that also plays to the point that I made about inward investment and bringing companies into the UK that will have high technology businesses that will be able to afford to pay bigger salaries because we've got actually cutting edge technology that we can sell abroad and sell all around the world. And the environment plays beautifully to that, because over the coming years, we're going to find a greater and greater demand for anything that is environmentally friendly.
Gerard, some of our listeners are expressing a bit of scepticism about you, saying you were a Brexiteer, you were an advisor to Liz Truss. What are the lessons you've drawn from those experiences?
Well, I actually wasn't an advisor to Liz Truss. I met her twice before she became Prime Minister, never once after. In actual fact, I had breakfast more times with Alistair Darlene when he was Chancellor, and I was an advisor to Gordon Brown's Business Council for Britain. So I've actually advised them all. But in terms of the Brexit issue, because this is in the political domain, I think the important thing is that since we left the ERM, we've grown at a faster pace than Germany, and we've grown at pretty much the same pace as France. And the reality is that we can't keep looking for easy answers. It's actually Western Europe is pretty much in the same boat. We need to become more competitive. So the lesson, in answer to your question, Adam, is something that John touched on, is about positioning ourselves to be attractive to international companies as well as UK companies, pulling the levers to make it easier for companies to invest. But we also need to craft a narrative around that. And it's about having policies that clearly do address the underlying competitiveness. The lessons from elsewhere are too often people go for a short or quick burst without making the background clearer and addressing some of those policy impediments.
And finally, John Caudwell, some, again, listeners are saying a wealth tax would be the answer, 2% on wealthy people, which I think would probably include you, and that would pretty much fill the black hole. What would you say to that?
Yeah, and this is a very popular one, isn't it, with people, and I get that. But the problem is that you'll drive rich people offshore. We've already driven a huge number of non-DOMs away with the change in the non-DOM rules, which I think were grossly unfair, not just wrong, but unfair in some cases. And we cannot just keep hitting the wealthy and driving them offshore, because otherwise the revenue comes down and doesn't go up. So it needs to be a much smarter approach than a wealth tax. And let me just say, if there was a worldwide dictatorship in the world, which we're perhaps heading towards actually, but if that were the case, and there was a 2% wealth tax across the board in every single country, I'd be a massive supporter of that, because the rich-poor divide is absolutely, without doubt, way too big.
Okay, well, on that note, even more apocalyptic than perhaps an economic crash. Thank you very much indeed, John Caudwell and Gerard Lyons.
Thank you. Bye.
Coming up.